else is in? I didn't get the notification.
Not yet.
I don't see it either.
It's working. Don't worry, it's working.
Oh, there it is. Okay. Well, hey, everybody, welcome. Today is Thursday, June 3rd, 2021. Short week, but not short on fun. We're back for another installment of our Team's Voice series. And we're really excited to jump into our third and final installation here. I'm Stephanie Stevens.
I am Heather Cox.
And I'm Victoria Dean.
And at this point, we're going to turn it over to Jason and team.
Yeah, they're going to wrap it up for us. And just before they start, if you have not already seen the first two installments, we'll make sure to reshare everything because this is the third part of the journey. So you may want to catch up on parts 1 and 2. And we're so glad that you're here to wrap up part 3. So we'll turn off our mics and videos and let you have at it.
All right, thank you. And yeah, this is a journey. It's still going. We're the first part, we talked about the business case, why we got into this. The second part, we really kind of touched more on the process of the migration and some of those things that we worked through. And today we're going to dive into 911, which I think is the topic probably most people are interested in because it's one of the most difficult pieces of this whole migration. I did bring a good-sized team today since there's so much in 911, excuse me, to address. We have, besides myself, we have, Brian Daniel, our telecom manager. Hi, Brian. He's here. And Blake Meyer. Blake, are you on? He's our datacom manager. Also, Jonathan Anglis. He's our senior network engineer from Cloud Ingenuity, who's brought a lot of depth and expertise into our project and help us to make this a success. Of course, Mac Edwards joining again, and our class clown, Ray Pillar, who works in our Computing for Arts and Sciences. He's a senior IT manager, does a lot with the end user side, the desktop side. So really kind of helps us draw it all the way from the end user all the way to the emergency services in this space. So, but just a little background, just to recap, our topology here is pretty diverse and spread out. We're a system, so we have several universities that we support, and what we did is we brought this all into a single platform. We have our campus up north in Denton, and we have a health sciences center down in Fort Worth. Downtown Dallas, we have a couple locations. We have our system offices, and then we have our law offices right across the street. And if you're familiar with, JFK and the courthouse, that's the same building where Jack Ruby shot Lee Harvey Oswald. That's our building there. Then we also have our Frisco campus, which is a little bit to our east, and then our Discovery Park campus. So we're pretty spread out. We have 4 institutions, 4 regional locations, with 200 plus buildings. And you can see the stats there. I think, so far we've mapped about 29,108 ports. So, like I said, we're giving to the room location. So that's part of our business requirement. 784 departments, 3 campus police departments, and 3 telco carriers. So we brought a lot of all that together into teams here. Here's a kind of a picture of our overlays. Here we have, our 940 area code up in north in Denton, down about 40 minutes south in Fort Worth, where is our 817. And then over in Dallas, which is our most diverse space, we actually they just rolled out a new overlay. We've got a 945 area code coming up. So I don't think we have anything in that space just yet, but we do have some 214, 469, and 972 area code numbers. So it really speaks to, the complexity, and Jonathan will probably tell you, because he wrote a lot of our rules there, but quite a bit of complexity in our dialing and normalization rules. So some of our business requirements in this space, of course, we're all dealing with Kerry's Law and Ray Baum's Act. Those are the two new federal mandates that we have, which also require us to capture attestation, and from the end users that they understand the limitations of E911. We also have a local police, campus police requirement to the room. Some areas may not. Your area may only be to the building and floor, or just to the building. But our police department did request to the room, in which we'll talk about how we work through that. Then, of course, we had oversight from our legal compliance, risk management, information security offices. And so what I want to do, we're just going to do a quick walkthrough on the path. So this is, of a 911 call, from the caller all the way to the responder. What I wanted to touch on today, and I'm going to ask the team to kind of come off mute and just kind of participate in the conversation here. But what happens, so as Brian, let's talk about this first step here. What happens when somebody calls 911? We have, person calls 911. Our first challenge was, mapping the spaces, right? So to give to the building for these people. And so our tactic there was this massive mapping campaign, and you led the effort in a lot of that. You want to talk a little bit about how we worked our way through that, and also you too, Blake, our datacom managers.
Yeah, sure, Jason. So like many of you, right? We're dealing with both federal and oftentimes state level regulatory requirements for these things, right? And sometimes a lot of that challenge is just working with your general counsel or whoever to help kind of define. Because I tell you, in all the places we've asked these questions or experienced this at other institutions, there's a lot of it comes down to definition and what your what your legal team's comfortable with. But I think I know for us, really I think the key requirement came down to what our local campus police and security groups, security details, the requirements they had, because in many cases it surpassed what the federal and state regulatory requirements were. And so, a part of that, in our case, we're, by moving and consolidating a lot of our voice services to Teams, we were changing from, several disparate or just telephony platforms across all those institutions that Jason just mentioned. I mean, our largest footprint was Centrex, Analog and Centrex, but we definitely had some of those campuses on your traditional PBX and PRI platforms, and so it didn't matter. Our campus police still kind of, again, in alignment with what Kerry's Law and Ray Baum's Act says. Like, look, we're used to getting that information down to the room level, and so we really had to. We're expecting that, right? When you guys, no matter how great this new system is, we still need to be able to know where people are. And so,
so Blake,
that.
I'm sorry. And so, but Blake, you jumped into talk about a little bit about your piece. And sorry to cut you off there, but I think we're a little short today. I want to try to get through this. Blake, the mapping project. So, at first you have your techs running around with these flukes, right? And so we ran into some challenges there too. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so the biggest challenge we probably ran into was scheduling, other than the physical limitations of we only have so many employees, student employees who can run around and go to each room and test. Just scheduling with deans and vice presidents and people who have full block schedules, getting under people's desks, plugging into patch cables and that kind of thing. That's required a lot of planning.
Yeah.
And also, limitation on hardware. You only have so many of these $5,000-$10,000 Fluke or NetAlly testers to run around with.
And so one of the things we thought about is like, well, what is that? What are we trying to accomplish there? And so Ray, developed this in-home, application we call it Airy, because if you think, we're the Eagles, UNT Eagles. That's our mascot. And eagles are in a nest. And what do you call an eagle's nest? An eyrie, right? And so that's where we got the name from. So where are our eagles nesting? And so talk a little bit about this app. So like Blake is saying, this device is expensive. You got to do a lot of scheduling, but the application solves some of that problem, right?
Yeah. So I don't know, bird's eye overview of the app is basically it's a PowerShell script that captures that LLDP packet. If you know anything about LLDP, we can send a trigger packet to make it fire off right away instead of waiting the 30 seconds. So kind of the same thing that the flukes were doing and getting location back in a few seconds. And then instead of them having to like call it out to their team member and, you know, avoid all of the typos with human interactions, we just captured it and sent it directly to a server so that we could then take that and inject it directly into the team's, server interface to specify the location of those. What we care about is the chassis ID of the switch and the port ID on that switch. So we know exactly where that's going, what room that's going to. It captures all that information, sends it over to teams through some channels of automation directly into teams. So that's the process in a bird's eye.
Yeah, and of course that could be run from any laptop. Right now we no longer need a $7,000 networking device. We've got just a standard desktop, and on top of that, you can also push that out through SCCM, right? So that in the future we have a process. We're trying to stay on top of that.
Yep.
So the next piece of this, right, you know, from the PSAP. So the PSAP gets the call, routes the call through the ERS to your local emergency responder on campus or off. Right. And so some of that is like, okay, well, how does this work? You know, and there are some, and Jonathan, I don't know if you can touch on that a little bit, but if you're on campus, of course, we know we have a map location that's going to be returned, but when you're off, you know, what happens?
Yeah, absolutely. So as part of building out the team's emergency locations, you have to define what is considered your internal network versus what's considered outside your network. As part of your deployments for this. When a Teams client makes that 911 call, it sends information about its location, the internal subnet, wireless access point, switch port, all that kind of stuff to Teams. And Teams will use that information to try and identify if it's inside the network or outside. If it is inside the network, then it will follow. It'll do an emergency location lookup. Depending on how you have that. How you have all your infrastructure configured. It might route that call to a third-party service such as West or Intrado now, and then that will take an XML header that will have your location data in it. If you're off network, that call will be routed to a generic call center, and that call center will manage the routing of that call for the person that's making the emergency call.
That's great. So we can, you know, locate you on campus or off to send you to the correct, you know, emergency responder to get to your location. And what we did is we stood up an HA pair of these EGWs, which is we went with Intrado gateways. And so we have one in our Denton location and one about 45 minutes south in our Health Science Center in our Fort Worth location. And just so happens during Snowmageddon, as we call it down here in Texas, when all the lights went out, the hospital stayed lit. So down there, so their data center was lit up while ours went out. We were still able to route those calls. We saw that the activity was still working, so we know we have a good configuration. It wasn't probably the kind of test that we had planned, but it worked. Tested it. And so, geodiverse locations is what we did for our gateways to make sure we had that resiliency there. Let's continue. So the next piece right here, we talked about dispatch, right? And so dispatch receives the E911 call and emergency information, including location. And so one of the challenges we had here is the character limits on the software display for dispatch. And so, Ray worked with this, on this to help come up with a nomenclature for complying with the character limits. That way, we wanted to provide a meaningful location to emergency services. So when they looked at that, it would tell them, give them a clear idea of, you know, what building and where they were located. And so how do we come to that discovery there? You know, Ray, you want to talk a little bit about that?
Or what? You know, I believe we just saw that when we were doing testing with the display, that a lot of the information we were passing when we were passing in a full building title was getting truncated off the end of the you know, the name. And so we were concerned about that, you know, since really the police department is the customer on this. We were concerned about them not, you know, a couple of things. I'm not getting a full message about where the instance is coming from, but also, you know, just not be able to respond quick enough, right? And so we worked with them to try to get the most amount of information, you know, into that 28 character limit. You know, that would be useful, right? And so we ended up going with a building abbreviation that the PDs approved, and then additional information to help get them into the right location as quick as possible. And so basically we worked with the PD to get that as abbreviated as possible using abbreviations they approved of.
Right. Yeah. Some of it was a little bit of trial and error, some testing, and Jonathan, where again in Teams do we put that? Do you recall?
Yeah, so that's in Teams. If you're looking at the administration interfaces under location, emergency locations. One important thing to notice is one important thing to observe is that you have a field called company name and a description. It'll default to your company name. So, for example, UNT was in this case. It put UNT in for everything, and they were filling out the building description in the description box, which is pretty logical, except that description box does not get sent as part of the location data. So you have to change the company name field to be your descriptor if you have multiple physical addresses for your buildings.
Yeah, that's good. No, yeah, that's another thing we discovered too, the company name. So continuing, also we have notifications. These are screen pops that pop up at specific workstation locations. So this is, of course, part of Carey's law. So you know, you have to notify emergency services or your front desk somewhere that's local to where the 911 call happens. And so we used Intrado's Desk Alert software is the product that does that for us. And of course, you know, there's some customization that had to happen there. And Ray, being our desktop manager and specialist there, kind of packaged that up and push that out. And you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. There were some specific configs that need to be set up. I couldn't quote them all off the top of my head right now, but basically getting the servers, getting the desktop alert pointing to the E911 servers. I don't remember what those are called, but getting those servers set up in the registry. There were a few other little tweaks that we wanted to make that we found the registry settings for. And so it was really it was a matter of building a package that we could deploy with SCCM that we could also, send a couple registry settings to the system as well that we could do via configuration items in SCCM as well. And so that's the route we took. And that way, when a police officer went to use their dispatch machine, everything was just set up and ready to go. They didn't have to tweak it. The only headache we ran into was the user, I guess the username on the actual server, the usernames and passwords weren't tied to AD, which I guess that was kind of beneficial. And so we were able to just kind of randomly generate usernames and username and passwords to fit those usernames, and they were able to enter those one time. So that was the initial. I think they just got an initial prompt for that, and they were able to put in a password. Everything else came pre-filled.
Right.
So,
thank you. And so yeah, that of course that screen pops up, and we have 3 different PDs that we work with, and so there's also different arrangements they have with their county. In Brian, I don't know if you recall those specifics, but I think like with Fort Worth, it goes to county or Tarrant County, and then for the first response, but the local PD also gets that screen pop to respond. But that's not the same process as it was up in Denton, was it? It was something else, right? So, I mean, if you're working with multiple PDs and police departments and counties, there's going to be some level of interaction you'll have to have, right?
Yeah, that's correct. So our Denton campus actually acts as a secondary PSAP for the county. So their requirements are a tad different, but as far as the rule set for notifications, we still follow the same kind of template across all three institutions or all three locations. So they work fairly similar across all with slightly different requirements.
Yeah. So just another thing to consider as you're building this out. That reaching even outside the organization, the immediate organization. And of course, when you work with your campus PD, I'm sure they'll loop in the appropriate people, but to have those kinds of discussions. But yeah, one of our what happens, right? Of course, the responders arrive at the desired location, which is what we want from an E911 call. But our ongoing challenge is validating location information and keeping that information current, because things happen, construction happens, spaces change, networking equipment may be updated, changed, renamed, all those kinds of things that happen now all have an effect on an emergency call. So our tactic here, we're auditing our map location information. We're performing test calls to validate the information to make sure that we're routing correctly. So that should become part of your self audit and plan. And also to develop change controls with facilities and network support teams. Like I said, those are those supporting pieces of architecture that now are part of your emergency services. So keep those in mind. But yeah, our ongoing challenges, right? So new construction changes to existing spaces, like I said, replacing networking equipment, IP phone software and desktop clients. This is one thing that we've been kind of struggling with lately. I know there's been a few, there's been a big push, on Microsoft side to kind of update some of these apps to actually pull LLDP information. So for instance, the IP phones, I don't know, and Jonathan, you have quite a few different manufacturers, but just across the board, we're not getting 911 in. We're not getting that LLDP packet, right?
Yeah, that's correct. So the OS level, so the Android application itself is the Android OS is getting the LLDP information, but that information is not being processed by the Teams app. I did mention it in chat. It was supposed to have been in the March release. Microsoft had set out a nice update saying it was supported, but after further conversations, apparently they had some issues with it. It's now due out around June, I think, from what I last heard.
Right. So, and those kinds of things. Application now is a piece, and the app development is a piece of this chain. Also, the desktop clients for Apple, right? The Teams client for Apple does not report capture that LLDP packet and report the location information. So, but what we do get right now, though, Jonathan, right? We're getting floor. What are we getting?
So that's entirely dependent on your how you do the configurations for your locations. But in the UNT case, because they do the way they define the subnets, it's essentially to the floor level in each building. So they have a floor definition for each subnet, or a subnet for each floor. And when you define the emergency locations, you assign a subnet. So those devices are still reporting that their location is in a specific floor.
Right. And so, yeah, other things to watch out for, like the subnets, even subnets that may span multiple buildings and or wireless access points that may report locations across floors. So I know we have about 5 minutes left. Of course, our ongoing issues here. We want to establish our relationships between IT and facilities, involve space management as an active participant, because they're the record keepers for building and room location, and also establishing regular testing and validation checks. So, making sure that the system is healthy. And so, like I said, we kind of breezed through this at a quick pace. I'm sure there's a lot more that you'd want to know. We're always available. if you want to contact me or anyone on this call here, we'd be happy to speak with you in more detail. But if you have questions right now, we've got some smart people on the phone here or on the call can help answer those.
Yeah, absolutely. So I see a couple things in chat, and I'm not sure totally if they've been answered or not. So why don't we, and obviously your team, Jason, will have access to the chat afterwards. If you guys have other things that you can contribute, please feel free. But anybody who wants to ask a question live, maybe, and if you put it in chat, that's okay to come off mute and ask live. We've got a couple of minutes for questions.
Are the chat
So
folks
here's
quiet?
one. So is there a way to test PSAP information communications without calling into 911? Yes, 933. So Jonathan, you want to talk about how we set that up?
Yeah, so a caveat for that. So 923 is a common number that Intrado use for their testing. On the Intrado emergency gateways, you can define a dial plan for test modes. When you dial 933, the call hits the emergency gateway like it's supposed to, like an emergency call, and the client and the emergency gateway behaves exactly the same, except it just doesn't send the call on and past that point. So you get all the same emergency notifications, you get all the same logging, all that information still there.
Good question.
In addition to that, I'll add as well, the Teams client will actually show your emergency location when you're making a call, but it also shows your emergency location in the call. If you go to settings and then the call button or the call tab, it shows your emergency location in there as well. So you can validate just by looking in there.
Great.
And I see Kyle. Hey, Kyle, how you doing? I talked to Kyle a couple times. You go way back. Do you have Polyphone sending LLDP to EGW? I think we answered that. We're waiting for that update to come out. So, but I tell you what, bud, the minute that I see it, I'll give you a call.
And I have a feeling that you guys are going to be pretty popular after this, as everyone else endeavors on the same path. So appreciate the offer for folks to be able to reach out to you. And if you guys don't mind, folks on the team from UNT, if you want to just pop your direct emails into the chat so that folks might be able to get a hold of you if you're down for that. I don't want it to be like a swipe left, swipe right situation, but thank you. Yeah, perfect. Look, brave leads. Okay, so thank you guys again so much. I think we'll go ahead and end the recording, and Heather's probably going to work some magic on editing this all together so that we can have it kind of tabbed for a progression. But once we get that done,